So you know what? Remember the Chinese balloon story?
Yes.
I just want to remind everybody, this is how the American military bases surrounding China.
Huh.
Are there any Chinese military bases surrounding the United States? I don't think so. Just so you know, that's what's going on. So this guy, Arnaud Bertrand, did a thread, and I found this very interesting. I wanted to share it with you because you don't get this perspective in the corporate media. That's the show we do here. We give you the alternative news source. We don't bring on main. So it says he says first the United States story. China sent a spy balloon over highly strategic U.S. sites. It chose to spy on these sites with a big visible balloon. Reported as being as big as multiple school buses that anyone can see with the naked eye, even from the ground. And they did that to demonstrate its capability. That was what the United States said.
We want to say, hey, we can send a balloon.
They wanted to let us
prepare for a cake.
Despite having a plethora of other more discreet ways to spy, like satellites or stealth drones, because that balloon couldn't do anything that their satellites already can do.
Or how about being directly linked to all of our major businesses,
Right.
completely enmeshed with us, so you can get your hands on whatever you want, whenever you want.
The only thing we make anymore is bombs. So if let's say we go to war with China and we bomb the shit out of them, then we won't have anything.
Oh, you're right.
Because they make everything.
Stuff.
The only thing we make, we're the biggest weapons exporter in the world. Of
When
course.
they say America doesn't make things, that's not true.
We make weapons.
I never thought of that.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, we're the biggest weapons exporter in the world. That's why
Well,
every
I think we're doing pretty good.
so every NATO country is required to spend at least 2% of their GDP or budget on weapons. And who makes the weapons? The United States. And that's why the United States wants to get all these countries into NATO so we can sell them weapons, because the United States government is controlled by the weapons manufacturers. And so they do what they want, which is why we're in Iraq,
Wait, so-
Libya, Syria, Afghanistan for 20 years, Yemen, the Ukraine, and now we're saber rattling in Taiwan and China.
So you're saying this is exactly the way they marketed OxyContin?
Exactly.
You take the doctor out to lunch and you...
So unclear that anyone doubted China had mastered the technology of hot air balloons and why it therefore needed to demonstrate this capability. Because that's what they said. That was China demonstrating they had the capability to do this.
I would be so... I mean, this has to be the biggest insult. If I was China...
I agree.
You like... I'm like, we invented gunpowder and written language, you motherfucker. Like,
China chose to do so. This is the United States. This is the United States story. Their version is that China chose to do this with the balloon on the eve of Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to China, where he was invited, and hours after signaling Blinken would also be meeting with Xi Jinping during his visit, a high-level meeting not granted to any U.S. Secretary of States in years. So they're saying, look, this is the United States version of the story. They did that even though they had this meeting set up.
sounds like they didn't want to go to a meeting. Is what
Sounds like it. The story, therefore, being that China chose to disrupt a meeting with its own president and to sabotage its own efforts at detente in the U.S.-China conflict. The Pentagon said it had been tracking the balloon for quite some time and that it wasn't the first time such an incident occurred. But this time, for unclear reasons, it chose to do a public announcement. I think we know what that public announcement was for. So this stuff has happened before. They said that wasn't even a Chinese government balloon. It was a private weather kind of a thing. And so this has happened before, they're admitting. And so why make a thing out of it now? Why? Because we can scare the shit out of the American people that somehow China is going to come and blow us up. So now we can spend a couple of $100 more billion on ramping. We just built 3 or 4 new military bases in the Philippines. This is all about the military industrial complex lining their pockets and draining your treasury while people live under every bridge in this country. You go bankrupt when you get sick, and half the country can't afford a $500 emergency.
And then you get hooked on fentanyl, also sent by China.
Also.
Like they already got us with fent.
So as a result of this, Blinken then announced he's postponing his China trip over something that they admit happened before and no one cared about. Now the story from the Chinese side. To them, this is a fluke accident, the balloon being a civilian airship used for research, mainly meteorological purposes, that deviated far from its planned course because of a strong westerlies. Apparently, there's winds that flow from west to east, and it took it around. Limited self-steering capability, the main characteristic of a balloon being, of course, that it can only go up and down. A piece in the Washington Post seems to confirm this, quoting experts in national security and aerospace who said the craft appears to share characteristics with high-altitude balloons used by developed countries around the world for weather forecasting. So the experts, even at the Washington Post, said, yeah, it's a weather balloon. And everybody uses these. And this got caught in some kind of...
The Pentagon says it posed no serious physical or intelligence threat.
And the Pentagon also said that it posed no serious physical or intelligence threat.
Oh, so this came out as, because I told you I was on the road and I thought I dreamt it because I heard about a balloon from China, Chinese spy balloon. And then I looked up it and then I saw suspected. That's the little qualifier. Suspected. And I was like, I suspect it's probably not that.
Yes. So even the Pentagon says they're not getting anything. The Pentagon itself said the payload wouldn't offer much in the way of surveillance that China couldn't collect through spy satellites, and that the balloon posed no serious physical or intelligence threat. I.e., the Pentagon themselves said it would make zero sense for China to use a balloon like this for intelligence purposes when it already has satellites to do this. Kind of begs the question then why they decided to make a big deal out of it in the first place. So they could ramp up the war machine, of course.
Yeah, this is a funny one because this is where you see the Republicans. I've been waiting for them to really jump on something classic Republican stupid. Like, why hasn't he shot it down yet?
Yes, they're making Biden look weak.
Yes.
And then what's gross is on the Democrat side, what they should have said was, well, it's probably not a spy balloon, idiot. But they can't queer the deal for their future war in 2025
That's
we've been
right.
reading about. So we got to say it's a suspected spy balloon at the very least, but we just didn't know why we couldn't shoot it.
But we don't know. I'll let you decide for yourself which story makes more sense. The sheer ridiculousness of the nth Red Scare episode is as obvious to anyone with an iota of common sense, except sadly, common sense seems to be in critical short supply these days.
I read a thing and I was trying to find anybody saying like
this
probably not a spy balloon. Yeah.
Hard to find, right?
I couldn't find it all. I had to text Aaron and he sent me something, some random.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then I'm reading it. I was like, CNN has an article addressing like, well, why send a balloon? It's a whole paragraph about why it's like, well, it's a low tech, it's an easy something. They have all these reasons why. And I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm like, okay, well, here's just one thing I would throw into while you're mulling over whether to use a balloon. It's a big white balloon that everyone's going to see
with the naked eye. With the naked eye, you can see it.
I guess it sounds perfect, like the perfect crime, except for this one thing.
Also, as often, the real story is probably why this story became a story in the first place. And the important context here is, of course, Blinken's visit to China, which could, one can always dream, have been a step towards some form of de-escalation in China and U.S. rapport. It was quite easily foreseeable that a story like this one on the eve of the trip would have made it politically very difficult for Blinken to go. So a plausible hypothesis is that this whole episode is an attempt by internal U.S. forces to prevent any U.S.-China détente.
You know what they're trying to do? I think it's like an Indiana Jones where he's got the bag of sand. He's trying to replace it to take the monkey out. So as Ukraine becomes more and more of a drawn-out thing that regular people notice.
Just like Afghanistan.
You got to slip in. Yeah, you got to slip in China to replace the Ukraine thing. Yeah,
100%. That, like when people were bending over backwards to give Joe Biden credit for pulling out of Afghanistan, I said, he's not going to stop spending the money that we were spending in Afghanistan. Right. They're just going to go spend it somewhere else. And that's why they're allowing him to pull out of this 20-year war, because it's starting to look bad.
Yeah.
So we can't keep spending all this money. We got to go spend it somewhere else. So they immediately invent Ukraine. They knew they had Ukraine in the chamber waiting to go. And then they knew China was going to happen too. So that's why so anybody who told you that they give Joe Biden props or credit for pulling out of Afghanistan is wrong. I'll just put it that way. I don't have need to insult them.
CIA psychopath going around on podcasts is saying Ukraine's just our practice. We
that's
can
right.
have them test our weapons
That's
when
right.
we have our war with China.
So let me finish this. One alternative hypothesis, much less likely, is that it's internal Chinese forces trying to do the same thing by sending this big balloon. It's unlikely that that's the case because China has time on its side, so it gains from reduced tensions with the U.S., and there isn't any obvious faction in China who believe the contrary. And B, it'd be immensely risky for anyone in China to do something like this, as it'd undoubtedly be seen as an act of high treason with grave consequences for themselves. Also, C, again, balloons like this particular one basically can't be steered. So how did they even know where the F it was going to go?
Well, we just got to get a little bit extra that our satellites couldn't get. We make up the difference in balloons.
To plan sending a balloon like this from China to a place over U.S. land isn't even doable in the first place. The last hypothesis, which I guess is also somewhat likely, is that this is a series of unfortunate events without any malice on either side. Balloon deviates from course, gets in U.S. airspace, people see it, and Pentagon feels it has to communicate about it. The media, wearing their usual China bad hat, decide to go all in on scaremongering, and political opposition and China hawks jump on the bandwagon. Administration feels it has no other choice than to cancel the trip and doesn't have the political courage to say, this is just a balloon that drifted off course. Well, I guess in this scenario, there is, in fact, malice on the media's part, and that of politicians and wider members of the blob, but it's organic malice, so to speak, jumping at a golden opportunity to scaremonger. Conclusion, however you see it, this story is absolutely shameful and a sad reflection of the insane times we live in, when rather than take the time to carefully consider facts, apply reason and common sense, we instead choose as a society to incite fear and hostility. That got really ramped up when Donald Trump became president, and anything that would scare you about Russia got repeated immediately, and nobody fact-checked anything, and they had to fire people almost on the weekly over at CNN and ABC News for launching false Russiagate stories.
Does it blow your mind when you think of how much the same media was like, you're racist to say the virus leaked in China?
Mm-hmm. And
then they're the first ones to say they're attacking us with balloons?
Isn't that something? That's right.
That's a crazy conspiracy that the virus lab in Wuhan might have had something to do with
racist.
Wuhan. But not that a weather balloon is spot. I mean, unbelievable. And the amount of people doing the question is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable to see the American public fall for this, but they have people like Rachel Maddow telling them this, and people know that. I mean,
what was her position on the balloon incursion?
She's a homosexual, Kurt, and they don't lie. And that's
why I'd like to hear what she says before I make a final decision.
And that's what Democrats think. And that's why they have Rachel Maddow. And nerds also don't lie. That's why they have Chris Hayes. Because nerds wouldn't lie. Of course they do.
People.
Chris Hayes actually told the truth about Ukraine a little bit.
Yeah.
He said, hey, maybe we should stop sending them arms.
So got in trouble again?
So
he gets in trouble every time.
So they forced a negotiation, and people called him the worst. His own audience.
He don't have the balls of Rachel Maddow.
He doesn't have the balls. Hey, everybody, we're doing live stand-up comedy. We're going to Tempe, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Nashville, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, New York, Cohost, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.